Alright, greetings to motorcycle enthusiasts. Today we will disassemble the carburetor of this Yamaha, and here are the tools we will need. We will need a 14mm wrench, on-demand drill, several screwdrivers of different sizes. I have J900 tools here because most of the screws in this carburetor are already small habits. A strong flashlight. Then we will need a Phillips screwdriver with a size 2 head and a size 3. And last but not least, a small pair of long nose pliers. Check the video description after you finish watching the clip to get more information about that specific carburetor. And here's one more thing people often ask. Does Car King make money from this? Well, not enough to get rich and live like Perez Hilton, but we do earn a little. When you purchase rebuild kits and other parts using our links, and that allows us to continue producing these small videos and maybe grow a bit. And not to brag or boast, but these are top-notch companies selling high-quality products, not some junk made in dubious workshops. So use the links provided and help us keep all of this going, so we can all maintain these great bikes for years to come. So we'll start here, but first I want you to take a look at this. Can you see this choke mechanism here? Take a good look here. With the choke open, it almost hits the next carburetor, which means we need to separate all the carburetors from each other. Otherwise, we can't take them out to clean them. We'll start with the choke linkage. I have two carburetors here to show you, because there are two variants. And here's the one with the lever directly on the carburetor. And then there's this one where the cable is attached to move the choke. But other than that, the carburetors are completely the same. Unfortunately, I can't say which variant was installed in which bike, but I wanted to show you this just so you know. And if you look here, you'll see these small holes on the choke rod. Here's one. And another one there. Now this means that behind that rod, there is a small spring and a small ball bearing. So you have to be very careful when disassembling it so you don't lose it. Now, the spring presses that small bearing or that small ball and holds the rod firmly so you can keep the choke in different positions. Otherwise, it will just return to the off position. So be careful when disassembling it, otherwise all the small parts will get lost. We will start by loosening these small 4 hex screws. And here I will show you that you don't have to unscrew them completely. You can see here that they are placed in this recess on this rod, so you don't have to unscrew them completely. So unscrew them like this and that's enough. Do this with all 4 screws and then we will continue further. And now all 4 hex screws are loosened. And when you turn them a little here, you can feel that there is a bit of resistance. And that's because a small spring with a ball is located right here. And then there's a small indentation so the rod can slide and be held in place. So I'm going to turn it a little and then slowly pull the rod to the side. And now you can start removing the brackets from the back and just watch how I do it. Continue doing this with all 4 carburetors until you completely remove the rods. Here you can see the small bearings I mentioned earlier, and behind them is a small spring. I just loosened it a little inside. And now we can turn the carburetor and carefully remove the bearings and springs. And these are one, and this is how they look. We will continue the same on the other side, and then we will proceed further. And here you can see 2 springs and 2 bearings, so we will put them safely aside and use them again when we reassemble the carburetor. And now we will move on to the choke piston itself. And now, we will use a 14 wrench. You can use it to loosen the choke piston here on the side, and it is easy to access. Then you can pull it out. This is what it looks like. And you can also separate them from each other. They are just kind of stuck inside. And there is the spring, cap, and piston. At the beginning, I mentioned that we have a problem with the choke piston that almost touches the second carburetor. This now means that we could loosen the hex bolt here, but we cannot remove the choke piston without separating the carburetors. And now, to separate one carburetor from the other, the whole thing would be somewhat unstable, which is why I am already removing the hex from all the choke pistons. That way the whole thing won't be so wobbly. When we separate the carburetors from each other, now we're going to start with the link rod, which is this one. Here they're already attached. And as you can see, this one already has the Alex installed. And that's why I'm using my Allen key in the original version to have a Phillips size 3. Because it's the original size. Now, if the heads here are damaged and you can't loosen them, you can try to unscrew them with pliers. Now I will unscrew all these bolts and then we will continue. And now the bolts are out and you can remove the linkage rod. And here I recommend slightly returning the idle screw so you can reinstall it more easily later. Since the flow chambers here are curved, the rail would interfere, so we'll just leave it like that. And then the second one will be reattached as soon as we remove the choke pistons. And in this way, the carburetors are a bit higher and thus more stable. And this is the second one here. I don't have the original screws here, but the original Phillips screws are the ones usually installed. This means you'll probably need to use pliers again. There are still 2 fastening elements installed here, so be careful when disassembling them so you don't lose them. And now I will unscrew these screws and set them aside along with these 2 brackets so I know exactly where to mount them later. Now I will remove them and then we will continue. Now all the screws are out, and you can see how wobbly the carburetor is without this rail. Now, if you want to move the carburetor, you will always have to press it a little from the outside. Right, I will turn it again because I want to show you something. And here we have a total of 2 connectors. And this is the pipe through which the fuel will pass. So the fuel flows through the middle via this connection, and then to the left and right. And through this pipe here, the fuel will flow from one side to the other. And then there's this small bright plastic part up here, and that's for ventilation. And oops, I pressed the wrong button. And this part is also just kind of tucked inside. And there are also some O-rings on the side. Report how he's dropping the throttle shaft. If you separate carburetor 1 from the other, you will need to resynchronize the carburation. And there's simply no way to avoid that. Below here is that small spring, and be careful when placing it because you will need it again when reassembling the carburetor. And now I will take out the spring. And this is what that small spring looks like. And that means the connection with the throttle shaft is loosened. And now I can loosen the carburetor and pull it to the side. I want to hold the left carburetor a bit tighter because I only want to separate the right carburetor from the left. And you can see the rings right here. And this is that small pipe. The O-rings are already here and definitely need to be replaced. You can find the O-rings in the repair kit, and you can find them in the video description. I have already put new ones here and cleaned the pipe well. And right here, you can also put new O-rings. And when assembling everything, use plenty of silicone spray. The pipe that distributes fuel. Double ring eyes. Make sure to clean this a little with a clean cloth and a drop of oil. And now you need to do the same thing with all the other carburetors. I did this one just as an example, but do it with all the carburetors. When you finish with one, connect those two carburetors back, then separate the next two carburetors and reconnect them, and then separate the last two carburetors from each other and reassemble them later. This is simply the easiest way to do it if this is your first time. And now you can remove the choke piston like this. You will need to use a little silicone spray and spray a bit here on the opening. Now I will reconnect the carburetors. I recommend having a professional clean the carburetor using an ultrasonic bath and then replace the O-rings. So from the very beginning, right? Disassemble the carburetors, then separate them and remove the choke. Then reassemble the carburetors, then ultrasonic cleaning, then separate the carburetors again, install the choke, then the O-rings, and finally reassemble the carburetors. It's a lot of work, but it's the easiest way, and you won't break anything that way. So now I'll just reconnect them. My carburetor is already cleaned, so I will reinstall the choke and assemble the carburetors to avoid putting too much strain on the O-rings. And here's a little tip. You need to shake the carburetor a bit to make it easier to connect them to each other. At the end of everything, I will reinstall the spring when the carburetor is reconnected. Everyone has their own trick. I'll show you how to do it. I will press the spring with needle nose pliers and then press the spring with my thumb. This is a matter of practice, but be careful during installation so you don't lose it and it doesn't jump somewhere. I'll show you right away when the rail is back in place. So now I will return the car like this. And in this way, I can continue to mount the rail. And right here, you can see that there is a small indentation. And this is made so that the rail fits perfectly onto the carburetor, really tightly. So make sure everything is properly aligned and then put the screws in, but don't tighten them. So in the end, when the second one is also mounted, not all carburetors will be perfectly aligned. Now I will return the small screws and then I'll show you how to reset the spring. All right, now the screws are in place, the rail is in place, and now I'll show you how to mount the spring. This screw lowers the carburetors. You could completely unscrew all these screws and then set the spring, but I leave them because then I don't have to adjust too much to lower the carburetors when I'm done. Now I will take the front part of the spring with needle nose pliers. And I will continue and wiggle it here and then press the small spring here with my thumb. And so I will do it. With this carburetor, it's really easy. But with some other carburetors, you will need a lot of patience. I showed you how to do it on one carburetor, and now you have to do the same with all the other carburetors. So now the disconnection and reconnection of the carburetor is resolved. Now we will deal with the details of the carburetor itself. And now we will proceed to remove the float chamber. We will use a screwdriver with a Phillips head number 2 to unscrew these 4 screws. In this case, use a small screw or Allen tool because we have J-Lin screws inside. Now you can lift the cover straight up. Now when I lift the cover and look inside the float chamber, everything will look nice with the new parts already installed because the car was really dirty when I first got it. Now I'm afraid that won't be the case for you. It will be quite dirty, so be prepared. Here's a small brass tube, and through this tube, the fuel for the choke will be drawn to the choke mechanism. And this tube is in the cover when installed. And in this small shaft right here, you can see the hole down there. Fuel flows through this hole into the shaft so that the fuel can be regulated. A small nozzle is installed in the shaft. And I think you can see it down there. And we will need a flashlight there. So you can direct the light into the small hole, and you can do that through this shaft. You can see how the light passes through it if the nozzle became loose during the ultrasonic bath. So, do not push any object inside, because if the hole becomes too large, your motorcycle will run too rich. So you definitely need to check this on all 4 carburetors. Now we will proceed to remove the float. The float is attached here with a small pin, and this pin should come out quite easily. But if it doesn't come out easily, you can gently tap it with a mandrel, but really gently. It's a good idea to place a piece of wood underneath, because that way these small holders won't break. Now, if that pin doesn't come out easily, you will need to separate the carburetors, which you have to do anyway. Then place the carbohydrates individually on the table. Because as you can see, you really can't reach it, so disassemble them. You can also use a little heat to help it to at around 70 degrees Celsius. The material that bonds the parts together becomes soft. And now this small pin comes out, and I'm holding the float. The small pin is out, and the float can be lifted straight up. Now the float needle valve, the height of the float, and I already have a new one here. The float needle valve hangs on this small metal tongue using this small wire and the float needle valve. Then you need to handle it carefully and slowly push it forward. And this is how it looks. Double check that float to ensure there are no cracks. Now take a number 2 Phillips screwdriver and loosen this small locking screw. This small locking plate holds the needle valve seat in place. As I mentioned before, I have already installed the new parts, which is why I am being extremely careful. I carefully grasp the needle valve seat with needle nose pliers and pull it out. And this is how it will look with the O-ring and the small screen. All these parts are in the rebuild kit that you can find in the video description below. We will continue with the main jet located here. So go ahead and unscrew it and check if you have that small washer still around it. These small washers are really important to ensure that the main jet is at the correct height in the jet assembly. And in this small recess, we have the idle jet, so use the appropriate tool. 4mm fits very well, and the best way to unscrew this is with light pressure from above and then quickly turn it forcefully. To loosen it, and the gasket came off along with it and is located here on the side. And this is what the idle jet actually looks like. Now on the intake side of the carburetor, you have the air jet, and it is also included in the rebuild kit. If you haven't ordered it, that's actually not a problem. It doesn't necessarily need to be changed, but now we will proceed to unscrew it. And this is what the air jet looks like. It is similar to the main jet, but the main jet is of a different shape, so you can't mix them up. The cover is attached with 4 Phillips head screws. I'm going to loosen them now. I will hold the cover firmly with my fingers because there is a spring underneath. And here we can see the spring. You can also see that there is a recess in the cover and the spring sits inside it to prevent it from slipping. Now we will remove it. We will remove this slider with the diaphragm and be careful not to tear it. As you can see, there is a small protrusion here that fits into the recess of the carburetor, so it cannot rotate. So just push the slider out. When it's out, check the diaphragm for damage, hold it up to the light, and make sure there are no cracks. If there is damage, a replacement is available. In the video description below, there is a link where you can obtain it. And here you can see 2 screws and a small opening. This small opening is necessary for the negative pressure to pass over the diaphragm and lift it. This is important to know because to reassemble it correctly, you need to unscrew the screws. I am holding the partial load needle here with my finger to prevent it from slipping. And now I will need pliers to remove the locking plate. And this is how it will look. Now be sure to remember which screw went into which hole, because the actual length of these openings is different. If you look closely, you can see it. And this small spring here, that spring holds the needle for partial load in place. We can proceed to remove the needle for partial load. Pay attention to this small plastic disc on the needle. It has a small protrusion on it. Now, if we look down, we can see a small indentation at the bottom left, next to the hole in the middle. And that's where the small protrusion must go during assembly. And now we can proceed to disassemble it and set it aside. Now, if you look here, you can see that there is this gold-colored component, and that's the mixer. And the mixer just kind of swings down inside. Let's turn the carburetor, and then it will simply slide out. Now, I assume it might not come out so easily for you. If that's the case, feel free to use a screw and gently tap it with a hammer. Now you will see a small plug here and another small plug here, which sits here in this groove and ensures that the mixer doesn't turn when the main jet is tightened. So, don't turn it when you're putting it in, just press it straight down if it doesn't come out. Strong for the air mixture, and here. To remove it, you will need a 4mm and a flathead screwdriver. Carefully unscrew it. You will need to turn the carburetor and underneath it. So do this for each carburetor individually, and don't do them all at once to avoid losing small parts or mixing them with others. Fortunately, everything came out easily. Now I will show you more details. At the front, there is an O-ring, then underneath it a small washer, plus a spring, and then the air mixture screw itself. And that is the order in which it should be assembled. Now, if everything doesn't come out together, you can take a paper clip, make a small hook out of it, and then you can pull out some of those small parts with it. And now the carburetors are ready for the ultrasonic bath. Hopefully everything will go well when you continue with your carburetors, though. I mean, that's why we're making these videos. Anyway, you know what to do. Subscribe, give a thumbs up and all that stuff. And see you in the next video.